Hi, my name is Julia Chen and I'm coming from the Kennedy Krieger Institute, and I'll be talking about my poster today on the validity of the telephone administration of the Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scale 3rd edition. So the motivation for the poster was really to look at the feasibility and validity of using a telephone administration of the Vineland for a very unique sample that we're looking at. So we are doing research with children who were admitted to inpatient rehabilitation units in disorders of consciousness. And one of the many challenges of doing research with this population is that we often have a very hard time getting data on their long-term outcomes. And we wanted to think of a way of how to collect long-term outcome data without putting the burden on families of having to, bring their child into an evaluation, because we are talking about children with significant motor and cognitive disabilities following injury. So this project really looked at could we feasibly use a telephone administration of the Vineland. So to go into what our participants looked like, we collected data from 41 children who were admitted to inpatient rehabilitation units in disorders of consciousness. And to define disorders of consciousness, it's the presence of severely altered arousal and awareness of the self and environment, often following severe brain injury. And these children were on average 9.7 years old, and if we take a look at the demographic information here, the age of injury was around 9.7 years of age. Their age of evaluation was on average about 5 years out from their injury. So that's also a unique kind of long-term outcome that we're talking about. Much of the literature is looking at maybe 2 years out from injury. We're looking at much longer term outcomes. In terms of the measures that we looked at, so the main focus was the Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales 3rd edition, and this was administered over the phone with one parent of the child. Another scale that we looked at was the Glasgow Outcome Scale Extended Pediatric version, the GOSE-PEDS, and this really looks at across a 1 to 8 point scale functional outcomes of these children. And it can range from upper good recovery, so they're really kind of making very good recovery, able to participate in most aspects of their life, to a vegetative state or death. So all of these kids obviously survive to long-term outcomes, so our range is 1 to 7. And then the last measure that we looked at was the Child and Adolescent Scale of Participation, which is, again, a parent report measure that looks at home, school, and community participation. And all of these measures were administered over the phone. So looking at the results, we wanted to take a deep dive into what the Vineland scores looked like. And here are the mean scores across the adaptive behavior composite as well as the different domains. So as we can see, really these kids are functioning at the lower ends of what could possibly be on the Vineland scales, with really motor skills were most impacted at long-term outcome, and they were doing relatively better in terms of socialization skills. It is important to note that 8 out of 41 children in our sample had the lowest possible adaptive behavior composite score, and I'll talk a little bit about what we might think about that. And then when we look at the question of validity, we wanted to do quick validity checks with these other functional outcome measures that we collected. So here we can see that the Vineland scores very nicely kind of varied with GOSE-PEDS scores, with kids in the vegetative state and the severe disability group really having the lowest Vineland scores. So the Vineland is really able to kind of show us that adaptive functioning correlates with what functional outcome and stage we're looking at long term. And then here we looked at the correlation between the Vineland and the CASP, so the child's participation scale. And here we again see a really nice correlation where kids with lower functioning on the Vineland was also reported by their parents as participating less in their school, home, and community environments. And when we break down the different domains across the Vineland as well as across the CASP here, again, we see correlations really mostly in the 0.8 range, so really nice correlations where it's really kind of fitting tightly together. So all in all, what we found from this was a really nice way for us to kind of contribute to the literature showing that it's feasible to provide a telephone administration of the Vineland to really give us a way to collect data from this population of kids and reduce the burden on families to have to come in for evaluations for long-term follow-up. And so it's feasible to be able to collect that data, and we also have some evidence of its validity, that the Vineland scores are really correlating nicely with some other measures that have been validated to look at long-term outcomes, such as the GOSE-PEDS and the CASP. As I sort of mentioned, we did have this finding of 8 children who had the lowest possible score on the adaptive behavior composite. And we want to just sort of think about that as a potential limitation and something for researchers in the future using this to be wary of, that we might not be capturing the full range of scores at the lower end of functioning, given that 8 children did have the lowest possible score. So something to sort of consider, what other ways, what other qualitative data we might be able to collect to better describe that. But all in all, we were very excited to share this data and this research with everyone, and really looking forward to see how we can take the Vineland and other measures via telephone administration to collect more long-term follow-up data on this population. Thank you.